Good day, my esteemed students, especially of the American University of Nigeria here in Yola. I remain Bello Mohammed Magaji, an associate professor of law and chair public international law of the American University of Nigeria here in Yola. In continuation to our lectures on public international law for the spring semester, today we shall be looking at international law and the question of terrorism. International law and the question of terrorism. Now, first let us still go back and define what international law is, even though we've done this in the fall semester in 2023. International law is a set of rules and principles that govern the relations between states and other international actors. It encompasses treaties, conventions, and customary practices that guide the conduct of nations in the international arena. This is just a simplistic definition I have given of international law, which you may find other definition by some other learned authors of what international law is all about. Now, we also looked at the relevance of international law, even as it relates to Nigeria. We looked at that in the fall semester, which we say incorporation into domestic law, that Nigeria recognizes the importance of international law and often incorporates international treaties into its domestic legal framework. And then, of course, constitutional provisions, where the Nigerian Constitution of 1999, as amended, establishes international peace and security as a fundamental objective and directive principles of state policy. Here I'm referring to Chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution. Now, let us look at the main issue, that is terrorism in international law. Terrorism in international law. You've been hearing about the word terrorism. Terrorism. What is terrorism? Now, I've made a very simple definition of terrorism, and then, of course, you will find different definitions, even in our local law, the law on terrorism in Nigeria. But I have said that terrorism is a complex and evolving concept, and then various international instruments offer different definitions. The United Nations has attempted to define terrorism as a criminal act intended or calculated to provoke a state of terror in the general public. This is a very simplistic definition by the United Nations, but you will see, as I have said, as we progress, other definitions on even in our domestic act on terrorism. Now, having looked at a simplistic definition of terrorism, now let us look at the international conventions on terrorism. First, the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy, that's 2006. This provides a comprehensive framework for member states to combat terrorism. As we've said, from the heading, United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy. This is a comprehensive framework for member states to combat terrorism. We also have the International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism, 1999. This convention addresses what? The financial aspect of terrorism, because the act aimed at blocking the avenue towards financing terrorism, where terrorists get their funding. The act tends to what? Suppress the funding of or financing of terrorism. Now let us look at also, having looked at the international conventions on combating terrorism, what is Nigeria's approach to terrorism under international law? Firstly, Ratification and Enforcement Act. This governs the incorporation of international treaties into Nigerian law. Treaties related to counterterrorism are ratified and enforced to combat terrorism effectively. Secondly, we have Anti-Terrorism Act 2001. This provides a domestic legal framework for combating terrorism in Nigeria. It criminalizes acts of terrorism and outlines procedures for investigation and prosecution of terrorism. So Nigeria is also a major player in the fight against terrorism under international law. Now, the Nigerian judiciary has also played its part on terrorism in trying to combat terrorism via the courts. We have several cases, but two prominent cases that I will advise you to look up to, so that when we come to discuss them in our classes, later in our classes, we shall look at them. That's the case of Nigeria versus Haruna Abbas and others, reported in 2013. This is a landmark case where the court applied both domestic and international legal principles to convict individuals involved in terrorist activities. The second important case is Mohammed versus Federal Republic of Nigeria, where judicial pronouncements on the compatibility of domestic anti-terrorism laws with international standards, where the court was called upon and the court pronounced on the compatibility of domestic and anti-terrorism laws with that of international laws. As I have said, I will advise you to look up these cases, and we shall discuss them in more detail in subsequent encounters. Now, there's also the judicial review and the rule of law. Now, under executive actions, Nigerian courts play a crucial role in reviewing executive actions related to counterterrorism to ensure they comply with both domestic and international legal standards. A case in point is that of Nnamdi Kanu versus Federal Republic of Nigeria, where the courts have consistently maintained that the executive should act within the confines of the law. At a certain point, the Court of Appeal gave bail to Nnamdi Kanu, but then the authorities did not release him. But the important thing is that the court acts within the framework of the law to grant him bail, which the executive, for one reason or another, they have not, and the cases are ongoing against Nnamdi Kanu. Now, let us look at the future challenges and prospects. There are some emerging issues under international law that borders on terrorism. First is cyber terrorism. Cyber terrorism. The rise of cyber threats require the adaptation of existing legal frameworks to address new challenges, because every day technology is improving, and those involved in cyber terrorism must be checkmated by what? By adopting legal framework to address these new challenges. We also have this transnational terrorism, which will involve cooperation with neighboring states and international organizations to address cross-border terrorism. As I did mention in one of our lectures, Nigeria is having some serious challenges now with one of our neighbors, Niger, moving out of Economic Community of West African States, which means that our borders with Niger in terms of terrorism is now open. So terrorists can use Niger's border into Nigeria. Niger will not do anything to prevent them. Why? Because Niger is not a member of ECOWAS. They will not want to assist Nigeria towards that. So we just hope that Nigeria will do everything possible to see that Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali are back into the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, in the interest of fighting international terrorism. Now, strengthening legal framework is also important towards the fight against terrorism. First is legislative reforms. We need to periodically review and amend legislation to address emerging threats. We have so many emerging threats, as I have said. It borders on cyber security, transnational terrorism, and so on and so forth. So we should strengthen our legal framework to checkmate these threats to international peace through terrorism. Capacity building is also important, where we enhance the capacity of law enforcement agencies and the judiciary to effectively combat terrorism, a situation where member countries should exchange security agencies so that they go get trained in modern and recent counterterrorism warfare so that they will adequately checkmate terrorism. The same goes to the judiciary. Our judicial officers should be trained in such a way to treat cases that borders on terrorism more expeditiously, more timely than the regular courts, because regular courts take a lot of time. But terrorism cases should not be allowed to take longer period before they are determined. In conclusion, international law plays a crucial role in shaping Nigeria's approach to terrorism. The domestic legal framework, combined with international instruments, provides a comprehensive strategy for addressing the complex challenges posed by terrorism. As the landscape of terrorism evolves, Nigeria must remain vigilant, adapt its legal frameworks, and collaborate internationally to safeguard its citizens and contribute to global efforts to fight terrorism. Thank you very much and have a great day.